The roar of the stadium was deafening, thousands of voices chanting his name as he sprinted across the pitch, every movement sharp and perfect, like he was born to play this game. Cameras followed his every step, children wore his jersey, and the world saw him as nothing less than a hero. He was the golden boy of soccer, the one who could never fail, the one who was supposed to have it all. But behind the flashing lights, behind the magazine covers and interviews filled with practiced smiles, there was a secret that gnawed at him every single night. It was not about money or fame, not about scandals with clubs or managers. It was about love, the one thing he could never confess, not to his fans, not to his teammates, not even to his family. He had learned to live with it, to bury it beneath victories and trophies, pretending that the image the world painted of him was real. Yet the silence inside him screamed louder than the crowd ever could. He knew the truth. He was hiding a love the world of soccer was never ready to accept. Every time he laced his boots, the weight of his hidden life tightened around his chest. He would run, score, and celebrate with arms wide open, yet inside he felt caged. At press conferences, they asked him about girlfriends, about glamorous women rumored to be seen with him, and he laughed it off, keeping his answers vague, never daring to reveal that none of it was true. The truth was living in shadows, tucked away in stolen moments with someone who should have been nothing more than a teammate, a brother in the game. But feelings are never that simple, and his heart had chosen the one person he could never safely love. Each victory he celebrated on the field only made the silence off it sharper, like a knife pressed deeper into a wound that in private, away from the cameras, away from the endless expectations, he allowed himself to breathe differently. There were glances in the locker room that lasted too long, hands brushing in ways that felt accidental but weren't, words whispered after late-night training sessions that carried more meaning than either of them could admit. He was a man trapped between two worlds, the one that worshipped him as a hero and the one where his love had to hide in shadows. And each day, the line between those worlds grew thinner, more dangerous. Every time he held back what he truly wanted to say, the pressure grew, the guilt sharpened, and the loneliness became unbearable. He was living two lives, and the fear of being exposed never left his mind. The media loved to invent stories about him, pairing him with supermodels, painting pictures of romances that never existed. And he played along because it was easier than telling the truth. He smiled in photographs, posed at events, but behind closed doors, his reality was something entirely different. The man who stood by his side in those quiet moments wasn't a glamorous woman but someone he shared the field with, someone who understood his every struggle because he carried the same secret too. It was a love built in silence, but it was also a love that made them feel alive in a world that would rather erase them. The fear of discovery was constant. A misplaced text, a careless photograph, a slip of the tongue, any of it could shatter everything. And yet, despite the danger, he couldn't walk away. This was the only love that ever felt real, and no amount of trophies or fame could fill the void it left inside him when they had to pretend that. He often wondered how long he could live like this. How long he could keep smiling in public and breaking in private. Every morning when he looked in the mirror, he saw two versions of himself, the champion adored by millions and the man terrified of being hated for who he truly was. That duality wore him down, piece by piece. He dreamed of freedom, of walking hand in hand without fear, of kissing without worrying who might be watching. But soccer was ruthless, and the culture around it even more so. He had heard the chants, the slurs, the jokes thrown around casually in locker rooms, words that burned him more than any injury ever could. And so he swallowed his truth, pushing it deeper, pretending it didn't exist. But the truth has a way of finding its voice, even when you try to silence it. There were nights when the pressure became unbearable, when he would sit alone staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was worth it. He thought about what would happen if he told the world, if he stood up and said the words he had never dared to speak. Would they still cheer his name? Or would the same stadium that adored him turn against him? Would his career survive? Would sponsors still call? Would teammates still respect him? The fear of rejection was heavy, but so was the pain of silence. It was like carrying a storm inside his chest, one that no amount of success could calm. And yet, despite the storm, he held on to those stolen moments, those secret smiles, because they reminded him he was still human, still capable of love. The higher he rose in his career, the harder it became to hide. Cameras followed him everywhere, journalists dug for stories, and fans demanded more of his life. The walls closed in tighter, but so did the bond with the one person who understood his pain. Together, they built a hidden world, one where love could exist if only for a few hours, before reality came crashing back. It was forbidden, dangerous, and fragile, but it was also the only thing that kept him from breaking completely. In those rare moments, he didn't feel like a star, or a hero, or a prisoner. He just felt like himself, and that was worth every risk. The days that followed were a blur of training sessions, flights, and matches, yet none of it could drown out the storm inside him. The more he tried to bury his feelings, the stronger they became, pulling him into a dangerous space where love and fear collided every single day. He would walk into the locker room pretending to be just another player, laughing at jokes, slapping backs, joining in the banter. But every time his eyes found him, the one person he wasn't supposed to notice, his heart would falter. He memorized the way his teammate tied his laces, the way his smile lit up the dullest morning, the way his voice carried more comfort than a stadium full of cheers. Every glance felt like a secret, every touch like fire, and though the world saw nothing, to him it felt like everyone could see right through his skin. Pretending to be indifferent was a game he was losing, and he knew it. Late at night, when the world went quiet, he replayed their private moments like a film he couldn't stop watching. The whispers in the hallway after practice, the stolen minutes in hotel rooms on away games, the soft laughter shared under the heavy weight of silence. They never spoke of the future because they both knew how fragile it was. A single slip could end careers, destroy reputations, and bring down everything they had worked for. But in those brief windows of freedom, nothing else mattered. He wasn't the golden boy, and his teammate wasn't just another player. They were simply two men, finding comfort in each other's arms, daring to live a truth that the world would never accept. Yet even in those moments, the fear never disappeared. It hovered above them like a shadow, reminding them that what they had was borrowed time. There were mornings when he would wake up in his teammates' arms and wish he could stay there forever. But reality always came knocking. A message from the coach, a call from the press, a knock on the hotel door. Suddenly the world demanded their performance again. He would slip back into the role everyone expected, the perfect star who had no cracks, no scandals, no secrets. Sometimes he wondered if his teammate felt the same heaviness, the same suffocating pressure of living two lives at once. But when their eyes met across the field, when one smile carried more meaning than words ever could, he knew the answer. They were both drowning in the same storm, clinging to each other to stay afloat. It became harder to ignore the rumors. Fans noticed when he wasn't seen with women, tabloids invented fake romances, journalists pressed him with questions he dodged with practiced ease. Every answer was a performance, every smile a mask. And though the world praised his composure, inside he was unraveling. He wanted to scream the truth, to claim his love openly, to stop pretending. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not when the cost was so high. The game that gave him everything had also taken away the freedom to be himself. And that irony cut him deeper than any injury ever could. He carried trophies, medals, and records, but he could not carry the right to hold the hand of the person he loved. The more the pressure built, the more he relied on the stolen moments to survive. There were nights when they would talk in whispers about what it would feel like to walk down the street without hiding, to celebrate a goal with a kiss instead of a handshake, to sit across from family and not have to lie. Those conversations were filled with longing but also pain, because both knew how far from reality those dreams were. Still, those talks gave them strength, like small pieces of hope stitched into a life of silence. And hope, even in its smallest form, was enough to keep them going. It was enough to make the fear worth it, but cracks were beginning to show. Teammates noticed how close they were, how their connection seemed deeper than friendship. The media speculated on their bond, twisting it into stories of rivalry or brotherhood. Nobody suspected the truth, but the constant eyes on them made every move dangerous. They learned to be careful, to hide even more, to never linger too long in each other's company when others were around. Yet the more they tried to create distance in public, the closer they grew in private. The love they shared was like a fire, the more it was denied oxygen, the hotter it burned. And with every passing day, it became harder to control. Sometimes he asked himself if love was worth the risk, if holding on to this secret would one day ruin them both. But then he would see his teammate smile, or feel his hand brush against his, and the answer became clear. Yes, it was worth it. Because this love was the only thing that felt real in a world built on performance and lies. Fame was hollow without it, victories meaningless if he couldn't share them with the one person who made his heart race. It was forbidden, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But it was also the only truth he had left. And no matter how much it scared him, he couldn't let it go. The season was reaching its peak, and with it came even more pressure. Every match mattered, every headline magnified his image, every mistake threatened to unravel the flawless reputation he had built. He carried the weight of a country on his shoulders, adored by millions, yet he felt emptier than ever. Success was supposed to feel like joy, but for him, it was more like a shield, a distraction to keep people from noticing the truth burning quietly behind his eyes. He was celebrated for goals, cheered for victories, and showered with fame, but no one saw the fear that haunted him every time the stadium lights dimmed. When the roar of the crowd faded, all that remained was silence, and in that silence lived a love he was both desperate to protect and terrified of losing. It was in those moments of quiet that he felt the sharpest pain, because he knew the higher he rose, the more dangerous the fall would be if the world discovered what he had been hiding. His teammate was becoming just as essential to him as the ball at his feet. On the field, they understood each other with an unspoken rhythm, passes flowing effortlessly, movements aligned as if they shared the same heartbeat. Off the field, their connection ran even deeper, weaving itself into every stolen glance, every lingering touch, every whisper exchanged in the stillness of night. They were building a life in fragments, creating a mosaic of secret moments that only they could see. Sometimes it felt like enough, like they could survive forever on half-truths and hidden love. But other times, the longing to be open, to be real, crushed them both. He often caught his teammates staring at him with eyes that seemed to ask, "How long can we keep living like this?" He never answered aloud, because he didn't know himself. All he knew was that walking away felt impossible, and being discovered felt catastrophic. As the team traveled from city to city, the danger of exposure grew sharper. Hotel rooms had to be chosen carefully, conversations cut short if anyone walked by, even text messages had to be coded to avoid suspicion. They learned to speak in fragments, to express love in silences rather than words. A look across a crowded room became a declaration, a brief brush of fingers became a promise. Yet, despite all their caution, the risk never left his mind. Every time someone raised a camera, every time a journalist asked a personal question, his chest tightened with panic. What if they found out? What if a single careless mistake destroyed everything? He had seen how brutal the world of soccer could be, how quickly fans could turn, how mercilessly the media could tear someone apart. And the thought of being at the center of that storm terrified him, but the fear was matched equally by the depth of what he felt. When they were together, the walls around him crumbled. For once, he didn't have to be perfect, didn't have to be strong, didn't have to pretend. He could laugh freely, let his guard down, and show the side of himself no one else was allowed to see. Those nights were his lifeline, the only thing keeping him from losing himself completely to the lie he lived. And each time he left those moments behind, slipping back into the world of cameras and fans, he carried with him a piece of that hidden love, tucked carefully in his heart like a secret flame. It burned quietly but powerfully, giving him strength even as it scared him to death. There were moments when his teammate tried to reassure him, telling him they could handle it, that as long as they had each other, nothing else mattered. But he wasn't so sure. He thought about the jeers from the stands when fans mocked other players, about the cruel words tossed casually in locker rooms. He thought about how quickly admiration could turn into hatred, how love could be twisted into scandal. The world of soccer had given him everything but had also built a cage around his heart. Breaking free felt like the greatest risk he could ever take. And yet, the longer he hid, the heavier the cage became. That he found himself staring at the future with a mix of hope and dread. Part of him dreamed of a day when he could walk into the open with his teammate by his side, free of lies and fear. But another part knew how fragile their reality was, how easily it could all shatter. He wondered if he was selfish to keep holding on, if love that had to be hidden could truly survive. Still, when he thought about letting go, the idea tore him apart. Because in a life filled with expectations and performance, this love was the only thing that felt real, the only thing that reminded him he was human beneath the jersey, beneath the fame. And no matter how dangerous it was, he couldn't imagine his life without it. The tension inside him was reaching a breaking point. Every day felt like a balancing act, walking a tightrope stretched between glory and disaster. The fans screamed his name, the press praised his discipline, his coach trusted him as the heart of the team, but none of them knew the war he fought in silence. He carried the secret like a second skin, invisible to the world but suffocating to him. At night, when the stadium lights faded and he lay alone in his hotel room, the fear of discovery crushed him. He would stare at the ceiling, his mind racing with what-ifs. What if a teammate caught them in a moment of weakness? What if a journalist connected the dots? What if one photograph revealed the truth he had worked so hard to hide? And yet, despite the fear, his heart refused to let go. He was in love with someone he could not have, and the pull of that love was stronger than all the risks combined. The bond between them only grew deeper. On the field, they were unstoppable, a perfect pairing that fans adored and analysts praised. Their chemistry was undeniable, their connection unshakable. But off the field, that same chemistry was a dangerous secret. They learned to communicate in coded ways, sharing thoughts with a single glance, slipping into shadows when they could, finding stolen moments between endless schedules. It was not enough, but it was everything they had. Those quiet encounters became his oxygen, the only thing keeping him alive in a world that demanded he live a lie. Every brush of hands, every whispered word carried the weight of unspoken promises. They both knew they couldn't continue like this forever, but neither dared to imagine what would happen if the world found out. There were nights when the pressure made him angry, not at his love, but at the world that forced them to hide. He would pace the room, fists clenched, voice breaking as he whispered about the unfairness of it all. Why should loving someone be a crime? Why should the world worship his talent but condemn his heart? His teammate would calm him, holding him close, reminding him that they were stronger together. But even those reassurances could not erase the truth. They were trapped in a system that would not forgive them for being who they were. And the more success he gained, the less freedom he had. Fame was supposed to be a gift, but for him it felt like a prison, one that locked away the most important part of his life. The fear became sharper during interviews. The questions were innocent on the surface, reporters asking about his personal life, his supposed girlfriends, his plans for the future. Each time, he had to lie, his voice steady while his heart raced inside. He learned to laugh off rumors, to dodge questions with practiced charm. To the world, he was untouchable, a perfect role model. But inside, he was crumbling under the weight of the lies. He knew he couldn't keep this act forever. One day, someone would see through him. One day, the truth would spill out. And he didn't know if he was ready for that day. Still, no matter how much fear filled him, love gave him courage. He remembered the way his teammate looked at him after a game, sweat dripping, faces flushed with victory, when the rest of the team celebrated but their eyes found each other. In that single look, he felt more seen, more alive, than in all the adoration of millions. He realized then that this was not a weakness. This love, though hidden, was his strength. It gave him the fire to keep playing, the heart to keep fighting, the will to keep living through the lies. Without it, he knew he would break. With it, he still had hope, but hope was fragile. The world they built in silence was starting to strain under the pressure of reality. They couldn't keep dodging questions, couldn't keep pretending forever. He could feel it in every stolen kiss, every hurried goodbye. The secret was growing heavier, threatening to crush them both. And though he didn't want to admit it, a part of him knew that the truth would not stay hidden forever. Secrets have a way of finding light, no matter how deeply buried. And when that day came, nothing would ever be the same again. The storm inside him was now impossible to ignore. Matches came and went, victories piled up, the newspapers screamed his name in glory, but behind all the triumphs he was unraveling. Fame was supposed to be a crown, yet it felt like chains around his neck. Every time he stood on the podium holding another trophy, the applause felt hollow because the one thing he wanted most was the one thing he could never share with the world. His teammate was always there beside him, smiling in photographs, celebrating shoulder to shoulder, their bond painted as brotherhood in the eyes of millions. But beneath the surface, it was something the cameras would never understand. Their closeness was real, but its truth was forbidden, and hiding it drained him with every passing day. The silence was eating away at both of them, and though they tried to pretend they were strong enough to carry it, cracks began to form, the smallest things became dangerous. A message left unread too long, a look that lingered in the wrong moment, a hand that brushed against his when others were near. Each detail carried the risk of exposure. They learned to move like shadows, careful and calculating, but humans are not made to hide love forever. There were moments when he wanted to scream, to take his teammate's hand in front of the world and finally stop lying. But fear always stopped him. Fear of headlines calling him a fraud, fear of fans who would spit his name instead of chanting it, fear of losing everything he had built since he was a child chasing a ball on muddy fields. He wanted freedom, but the price of that freedom felt unbearable, and yet, the love itself kept him alive. On quiet nights, in the safety of locked doors, he found a version of himself that was real. They would talk for hours, not about soccer, not about fame, but about dreams, about fears, about the lives they might have had if the world were kinder. He would watch his teammate's face in the dim light, memorizing every feature, as though engraving it in his soul in case the world ever ripped them apart. In those moments, he felt something no stadium could ever give him, peace. It was in those embraces that he remembered why he kept fighting, why he endured the lies. Because this love, however fragile, however hidden, was worth every risk. It was the only truth he had, but secrecy has a way of turning into poison. The weight of it grew heavier with each passing week. Teammates started asking questions, joking about how inseparable they were, nudging him about when he would finally settle down with one of the women the tabloids linked him to. Every laugh he forced felt like another crack in the mask he wore. He could feel the eyes of the world pressing closer, hungry for stories, for scandals, for anything that could sell. And though nobody truly knew the truth yet, he could sense how thin the line had become. One wrong step and everything could collapse. The thought haunted him at night, keeping him awake long after the celebrations ended. His teammate felt it too. He could see it in the way his eyes hardened in public, in the way he became quieter around the others, careful not to draw suspicion. Behind closed doors, they clung to each other more desperately, as if each embrace could shield them from the world. But even in their love, there was fear. They began to argue, not because they didn't care, but because they cared too much. His teammate would tell him that love wasn't meant to be lived in shadows, that one day they would need to choose between truth and survival. He would argue back that the risk was too high, that the world wasn't ready, that their careers would shatter under the weight of the revelation. Their arguments ended in silence, but silence never solved anything. It only made the distance between them sharper. Still, no matter how much they struggled, they could not let go. Every time he looked at his teammate, he remembered the boy inside him who once dreamed not of fame or trophies, but simply of being seen and loved for who he was. And in that teammate's eyes, he found that dream fulfilled, even if only in secret. That was why he stayed, why he endured the lies, why he risked everything. Because in a world that demanded he be everything for everyone, this was the one place where he could just be himself. And though the fear of being exposed grew heavier every day, so did the conviction that he would rather live in danger with this love than live safely without it. The pressure of living in two worlds was beginning to break him down in ways he could no longer hide. His body still performed on the pitch, sharp and precise, his instincts carrying him through matches as though nothing was wrong. To the fans, he remained untouchable, the star who could do no wrong. But behind the scenes, every step felt heavier, every smile more forced, every interview a battlefield he barely survived. The cameras loved his image, but he hated the man reflected back at him, a polished mask hiding a truth he was too afraid to speak. His teammate noticed it most. In the quiet moments between games, in the way he rubbed his temples, in the sighs that came too easily, in the way his laughter no longer reached his eyes. The man who once carried himself with effortless joy was now haunted, and the secret they shared had turned from a treasure into a burden neither of them could escape. The fights became more frequent. Not loud, not violent, but heavy with tension. His teammate wanted more honesty, more freedom, more life outside the shadows. He wanted to stop pretending, to stop hiding behind fake smiles and empty answers. He wanted to be seen, to be real, to live without fear. But he couldn't give that to him, not yet, maybe not ever. He told himself he was protecting them both, protecting their careers, their futures, the game they had worked their entire lives for. Yet even as he spoke those words, he felt the sting of cowardice, the ache of knowing he was asking the man he loved to keep suffocating beside him. Every time they fought, he feared it would be the end. But every time they pulled apart, they found their way back into each other's arms, because neither of them knew how to live without the other. The world around them only made it worse. The media's obsession with his personal life was relentless. Paparazzi followed his every move, gossip pages speculated endlessly about his supposed relationships with women, and fans filled social media with questions and assumptions. He became an actor in a play he never auditioned for, crafting stories to satisfy curiosity, pretending to be someone he wasn't just to keep the truth safe. The lies piled higher and higher until even he struggled to keep track of them. Each time he posed for photographs with a woman he didn't love, each time he smiled at a question about marriage or family, he felt a piece of himself slip further away. His teammate would watch from the sidelines, hurt written across his face, though he rarely spoke of it. But the silence between them said enough. On the field, their connection never faltered. Passes still found their mark, goals still came, victories still followed. Fans marveled at their chemistry, calling it magical, natural, unstoppable. If only they knew the truth, that it was love, not strategy, that tied them together so tightly. But the same thing that gave them strength on the pitch was pulling them apart off it. The secret they protected so fiercely had begun to poison the joy they once found in each other. Love was supposed to be freedom, but for them it had become chains. And though neither wanted to admit it, both could feel the strain. He began to wonder how much longer he could last. Nights became restless, filled with questions that had no answers. Would his fans still cheer his name if they knew? Would his sponsors abandon him? Would his teammates turn cold? Or would the truth, once spoken, set him free in ways he couldn't yet imagine? The fear of rejection clashed with the hunger for freedom until he felt torn in two, unable to move in either direction. His teammate urged him to choose love, to believe in it, to trust that the world could change. But he had seen too much hatred, too much cruelty, to trust so easily. His heart wanted to leap, but his mind chained him to silence, and yet, even in the darkest moments, love kept them bound. One night, after another bitter fight, they sat in silence, both too tired to argue. His teammate reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. They sat there for hours, saying nothing, holding on like it was the only thing keeping them alive. And in that silence, he realized something he had been too afraid to admit: no matter the cost, no matter the fear, no matter what the world might do, he couldn't imagine a life without this love. It terrified him, but it also gave him strength. And though he still didn't know how, he knew that one day the truth would have to come out. Because secrets were heavy, and love was never meant to live in the shadows forever. The world around him was beginning to close in, and he could feel the walls tightening with every passing day. The pressure was no longer just an inner battle, it was becoming an external war. Whispers started circulating among the media, small hints dropped into gossip columns that questioned why he never settled down, why the star of the game seemed untouched by the glamour of women who chased him. The questions from journalists grew sharper, pressing into corners he could no longer avoid, and every interview felt like walking on thin ice. He smiled, he deflected, he played his part, but deep inside he could feel the cracks spreading. His secret was no longer safe, and though no one had proof yet, suspicion alone was enough to make his heart pound in panic. He could no longer tell if the looks from teammates were friendly or probing, if the fans' cheers hid judgment, if the cameras were capturing more than just his game. He lived in constant paranoia, terrified that the life he built was about to crumble. At the same time, the tension between him and his teammate reached its breaking point. They still loved each other with a fire that neither of them could deny, but the strain of silence was suffocating. Arguments became sharper, words cut deeper, and the fear of losing one another was now matched by the exhaustion of hiding. His teammate began pulling away in public, careful to create distance that broke his heart. On the field, they were still unstoppable, but off the field, their bond felt fragile, like a rope fraying with every secret they had to protect. In private, the love was still there, but it was no longer enough to silence the question that hung over both of them: how much longer could they survive in the shadows? The stolen moments that once felt sweet now carried bitterness, because they always ended in fear. Every kiss tasted of goodbye, every embrace felt like a countdown to an ending neither wanted but both expected. The pressure of hiding was not just emotional but physical. He found himself unable to sleep, his body aching under the stress, his performances on the pitch saved only by pure instinct. Fans praised his brilliance, but he knew he was running on fumes. The man adored by millions was slowly falling apart, and only one person truly saw it. His teammate tried to support him, tried to remind him that love was worth the fight, but he could see the pain in his eyes too. They were both exhausted, both drowning, and the secret that bound them was the same one that was tearing them apart. The love they once believed would save them was now slowly destroying them, not because of what they felt, but because of the lies they were forced to live around it. One evening, after a grueling match, they found themselves alone in the quiet of a hotel room, and the silence between them was heavier than ever. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, his heart pounding with words he couldn't say. His teammate stood by the window, staring out into the city lights, his reflection broken in the glass. Finally, the words spilled out, not of love, but of fear. He admitted he couldn't keep living like this, that the pressure was too much, that he was terrified of what would happen if the world knew. His teammate turned, eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness, and asked the question he dreaded most, "So what do you want? To keep pretending forever? To keep killing ourselves in silence?" He had no answer. His mouth opened, but nothing came. Because he didn't know what he wanted anymore. All he knew was that he couldn't imagine life without him, but he also couldn't imagine life where the world hated him for telling the truth. That night ended not with comfort but with distance. They slept on opposite sides of the room, a gulf of silence between them that felt colder than any winter. For the first time, he felt the terrifying possibility that love might not be enough, that fear could finally win. Yet even as he lay awake, staring into the dark, one truth burned inside him: no matter what the world thought, his heart belonged to the man across the room. And he realized then that he could not keep hiding forever. Because hiding was killing them both, and love was meant to be lived, not buried. The thought terrified him, but for the first time, it also gave him a spark of strength. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to face the storm, no matter how brutal it might be. The breaking point came when he least expected it. It wasn't during a game or an interview or a press conference. It was in a quiet corridor after a match, when a journalist caught him off guard with a question that pierced straight through the armor he had built. "Why do you always avoid talking about the women in your life? Are you hiding something?" The question was meant as gossip, but it struck him like lightning. He forced a smile, brushed it off with a practiced laugh, but inside his chest his heart was hammering so loudly he thought the whole world could hear it. That night, back in the hotel, he stared into the mirror for hours, replaying the moment. He saw the mask he had worn for so long, the polished hero who gave fans everything except the truth. And he realized he couldn't live like this anymore. The fear, the lies, the silence, they were suffocating him. He had given the world his talent, his victories, his body, his energy. But he had never given himself the chance to be free. And if he didn't do it now, he knew he would lose the one person who had made everything worth it. His teammate was waiting when he returned to the room, exhaustion written on his face, but also sadness. They didn't argue this time. They didn't whisper about the risks or the dangers. They simply looked at each other, and in that silence everything became clear. Love was no longer a secret they could afford to hide. He reached for his teammate's hand, not in fear this time, but in certainty. "I can't do this anymore," he said quietly, his voice trembling but firm. "If the world wants to hate me, let them. I don't care. I'd rather lose everything than lose you." For the first time in years, the words were honest, unguarded, raw. His teammates' eyes filled with tears, and in that moment, the weight of the secret began to lift. The decision wasn't easy, but it was necessary. They knew the consequences would be brutal, that the world of soccer was not ready, that headlines would scream, that fans would rage, that sponsors would turn away. But they also knew that living in shadows had already destroyed too much of them. So he prepared himself. When the next interview came, when the next question about his personal life was asked, he didn't dodge it. He didn't laugh it off or spin a lie. He took a deep breath, looked straight into the cameras, and spoke the words he had been afraid to say his entire life. His voice shook, his palms sweated, but his heart felt lighter with every syllable. He told the world the truth, that he was in love, and that the love he carried was not what they expected, but it was real, it was powerful, and it was his. The silence that followed was heavier than any stadium he had ever stood in. Reporters froze, cameras captured every detail, and within minutes the world erupted. Social media exploded with shock, headlines screamed in bold letters, opinions flooded from every corner. Some voices were cruel, filled with anger and hate, echoing the very fears that had silenced him for years. But other voices rose with support, with courage, with love. Fans wrote messages of admiration, people across the world thanked him for his bravery, for standing in the light when so many were forced to remain in the dark. He read those messages with tears in his eyes, feeling a freedom he had never known. For the first time, he didn't feel like a prisoner in his own life. For the first time, he felt whole. The days that followed were chaotic, a whirlwind of backlash and support, of headlines and interviews. Some sponsors pulled out, but others stepped forward in solidarity. Some fans walked away, but many more stood by him, louder and prouder than ever before. His career didn't end, it transformed. He was no longer just a soccer star, he was a symbol, a voice for countless others who had been forced into silence. The weight he had carried for so long was gone, and in its place was a strength he had never imagined he could possess. And through it all, his teammates stood by his side, no longer hidden, no longer a shadow, but the love he could finally claim openly. They walked into the stadium hand in hand one evening, and though some boos rang out, the cheers were louder, stronger, filled with people who saw not just a player, but a man brave enough to be himself. On the field, their connection was fiercer than ever, fueled now by honesty instead of fear. And off the field, they finally lived as they were meant to, free. It wasn't perfect. The world wasn't suddenly kinder. The hate didn't disappear overnight. But the freedom they gained, the ability to live their love without masks, was worth every scar, every risk, every fight. For the first time in his life, the golden boy of soccer was not just a star, not just a symbol, but a human being who dared to love openly. And that love, though once forbidden, had become his greatest victory of all.